Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a very special guest with us tonight. We have Dr. Devin Kearns, and let me get Devin's bio. Devin has a new job, a new position, and congratulations, Devin.
Thank you.
He is the Goodnight Distinguished Professor in Early Literacy at North Carolina State University at Raleigh. He is also a research scientist for Haskins Laboratories, affiliated with Yale University. Devin studies how students in the elementary grades learn to read and design systems to better meet the needs of these students. And for the full bio, you can go to devinkearns.org. All right, we are going to be looking at evidence-based answers to questions about decodable and leveled books. And the reason we're having this conversation is because Judy and I, my co-host Judy Boxner, and I noticed that there was an article up on the Reading Recovery website, and the article was called How to Pair Decodable Texts with Leveled Books. And it was by Michelle Dufresne. And it says at the top of the article that it is a sponsored blog. So it's sponsored blog content. So Reading Recovery is saying they don't necessarily agree or disagree with the author. So it's a sponsored blog. But I read through it, Judy read through it, and I had a lot of questions. And Michelle actually noted your research article, Devin. And the research article was entitled Text Types and Their Relation to Efficacy in Beginning Reading Interventions. And you were one of the authors, including Pugh and Hiebert. So, I figured let's get somebody on who has the research, who could clarify some of these questions that maybe other people have as well. So in reading this article, Devin, let's start off with the idea of the title. Is there any evidence that says that pairing a decodable book with a leveled book is going to promote better reading, whether it's reading comprehension or better fluency, better decoding? Does it have any evidence behind it? Because sometimes teachers will pair books, nonfiction with fiction. They have paired sets of books, but I've never seen this pairing before with a decodable and a leveled book using the same theme or, the same topic. So, we're curious to want to understand what that actually means.
Sure. Yeah, so I think in terms of the idea of pairing, first of all, let's start with the question, like, what does that mean actually to pair them? And I think, to me, the question is, like, it's unclear in the blog exactly what it means to pair them. And so to me, what's important or valuable about pairing is like getting kids to read different books on the same topic, right? Reading in themes is an evidence-based practice, and getting students to learn a lot about a single topic is a really good thing, because we can't teach the kids about everything. We can teach them a lot about something, right? Which is why themes are really great, because you can generate lots of language. So in that sense, like, I'm on board with the idea of giving kids access to texts that are controlled or decodable and that are less controlled, and sort of, I don't know, trade books, whatever we want to call them, if they're focused on the same content, if they're focused on the same theme, right? Beyond that, I don't really know what it means to level them exactly, or to pair them, right? So I guess that's the question. It's like, what does it mean to pair books? What does it mean? What do you think it means? I was not clear to me when reading the article.
So I'm glad you said that, because my understanding, I think, is the same as your understanding. Years ago, when I used to teach, when whole language was the thing, right? I remember coming up with different themes and pulling books for the same theme to try to develop vocabulary and a deeper understanding of content. I get that. That makes complete sense to me. I've never seen pairing with a decodable and then using the same topic that the decodable might happen to have, like losing a tooth, and then finding another book that's leveled, losing a tooth. I don't know what that is supposed to improve. I guess that's my question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if it improves content knowledge, that's not a bad thing. I think the challenge to me is that one of the things we want to avoid in beginning reading is sort of picking different books on different topics and organizing decoding instruction in a way that reflects sort of like sometimes choose your own adventure, right? Data indicate that there is an order in which we, can basically teach kids based on the frequency of letter sound patterns in the language. And so, once upon a time, people used to sort of teach it, the P says P because they're reading a book about a pig, right? And we've gotten better, I think, than that. But I know my very first class where I learned to teach reading, that's what was suggested to me, right? Like find a book on the, if you're talking about, pigs in the book, why don't you do decoding instruction on that? And so that's a really bad idea. And so I worry that the idea of pairing gets you in this space where you're not organizing things sequentially, right? Data are really strong on providing systematic instruction. When I think of systematic, I think of like ordered letter sound skills.
Yes, Judy is cheering for you. I'm sure you've seen our shtick with the cheer, so.
Love it.
Okay. So now, Judy, I want to know if you call BS on anything. Is there anything in this article that maybe doesn't make sense to you? Or maybe you have questions for Devin that you would like him to clear up for our audience, because I have a number of things, but I'm going to give you a chance to jump in here and ask your questions, or what are your thoughts?
So this is one of my favorite topics. You both know that I was trained in reading recovery and had a lot of familiarity with pair text. That was a big part of our balanced literacy days. We had a lot of books that were genre based, right? We'd have a fiction text and a nonfiction text on the same topic. And, we thought we were exposing kids to the same topic and knowledge building and reading a true story and a not true story. I haven't really seen in my structured literacy days, which I've been really immersed in for the last, I think, 8 or 9 years. I haven't really seen pair text in this way. I have to say that, I've really shifted in my last couple of years. I really see great value in decodable text, especially for early readers when they're learning how to crack the code. I do think that there is a place for trade books. I think a great place for trade books in the earliest stages of reading is as read alouds. I think that, reading for pleasure is still important as well. Picture books have a place as well. But in my professional experience working with kids that I tutor and both in the field, I really see that controlled text for the earliest stages of reading that follows a scope and sequence has been most helpful to the students that I'm working with. And I think that the most important thing that I've learned is those books are used for a short window of time. They're not used forever. Once the kids crack the code, we're moving on. But I think it's a slippery slope. Like for some kids, we know I think the statistics are that like 40% of kids, no matter what you do, they're going to do fine. And my own sons included, they did fine with leveled literacy. That's what was in their classrooms. But 60% of kids won't. And I think that, you know, I've even played with some kids where I would give them, you know, control text in the earliest stages. And then I would say, okay, let me see how they do on a level text. And I would notice a lot of those students would revert back to bad patterns where they would start guessing words, where they would be tackling, you know, more complex words than what we learned, than we taught in, you know, the phonics block. So it's really,
That's a good thing. If they're tackling, are you saying?
No, I'm saying that they would see a multisyllabic word and not know how to tackle it because I didn't teach that yet.
Okay.
And then they would start to revert to guessing. And that's not a great thing. They would revert to the patterns of looking at the initial letter. And maybe I never taught vowel teams. And now I'm presenting a book that has vowel teams. And
So
they're going back to cross-checking, looking at the picture and looking at the initial letter. So it's a slippery slope. I think that we must have all different type of texts in our library. Like on my site, we're shifting to having genre baskets. We're shifting to having interest-based baskets. We're shifting to having skills-based baskets. But I think the most important thing is the intentionality. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? What is it that I want kids to get out of the experience? But I have to say, Faith, you shifted me for the earliest levels, which used to be known as A, B, C, D, and E. I start with control text that follows scope and sequence, and I've had more success doing that.
So Devin, Judy hit upon a number of ideas here. I think one thing that she talked about was she's starting now with the most control, decodable, based on the phonics that she's teaching. But then when she started to implement something that was not as tight, the kids lost it. Can you talk about that in your research? Like, what did you find? Is there timing involved? Is it supposed to be presented from the onset, or is there a window of time? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, the study that we did didn't look at that. So it was a meta-analysis, which is basically putting together the results of dozens and dozens of studies. So there are 107 studies that were examined in that. And so one of the things that was not really easy to do was to examine whether or not, you know, where decodable text occurred in the program. Basically, we coded the text, like, do they include decodable text or not? And so what we did find was that we did an analysis that didn't get included in the paper about like time spent on text reading. And we didn't actually find an effect for time spent on text reading, which was kind of interesting. But not all the studies coded for that, so sometimes it's a little hard to know what to make of it. So yeah, I can't say about that. I mean, I think based on other research, right, like, you know, providing students with opportunities to practice with things that they can handle is important. And so you build their ability to process words by giving them opportunities to see lots of examples of things that they've been learning, right? And that's what decodable text and controlled text do, is they give you a lot of practice with the things that you've been learning. And when you get that practice, it kind of, you know, it can bootstrap learning of new things, right? So when you come to other words that don't have exactly the same letters, but they have similar patterns, you can use that information. So we did not address that specific thing, but I think other researchers have used that strategy. I mean, in my own work and other studies, we've used that strategy of like moving away from as much, well, we always do decodable text, but adding in more and more kind of less controlled text that sort of, you know, we didn't design them exactly to have everything that they were exposed to in the decoding lessons.
I think that was my question here. I think that after reading this, to her credit, she definitely cited lots of research. She had research by Wiley Blevins. She had your article in there. She had Tim Shanahan. She had Nell Duke. She had Heidi Mesmer. So, I mean, she had lots of Linnea Airy. She had lots of well-regarded researchers in this article. And that's kind of where it's very interesting. She was pulling out true statements from the research, but then kind of came up with her own plan. Am I on, off in terms of how you pair this? Like, that's the part that doesn't seem to have the research. She pulled research, but then came up with her own thing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, none of the, when I think about what I've done, what other people have done, what Tim Shanahan was writing about when I read his blog on these things, like none of these folks was saying anything about pairing. Like it wasn't a description of the benefits of pairing those things per se. So that is, as you said, kind of her own interpretation, right? The fact that kids need exposure to lots of different kinds of text isn't the same as saying that there's a systematic way to pair text. That's the part that is of her own making, right? And so I think when you look at that, it's the research doesn't support or not support that. The research just doesn't go into that, basically.
Well, Judy, this is so interesting because this is why we always talk about wanting to have the researchers on. This is exactly the reason we want to be that conduit where we have the voice of researchers so we don't play telephone here. I think that a lot of times I listen to podcasts and it's kind of their own spin on something that, it's kind of tilted in the favor of a certain publisher or program, and it's misinterpreted. This is why I think it's important to have people like you. So, Judy, when you read that, did you get the feeling from reading this that maybe there was research behind this because many researchers were cited? Or did you question this as well? I'm just curious to know because a lot of bells were going off in my head, but maybe I'm thinking differently. I don't know. What were your thoughts?
So my first honest thought, I have to tell you, was I was kind of excited that Reading Recovery was finally acknowledging decodables, because when I was a Reading Recovery teacher, I had no idea what decodables were. Maybe I did because I grew up in the 80s and I probably read decodables as a little kid, but I thought that was kind of amazing. That was amazing. That's basically acknowledgement that, something has to change. And I wish that change would have happened a long time ago, because I was screaming this from the rooftops years ago while I was still in the role of Reading Recovery, saying, hey, something's not working. Hey, a lot of kids aren't discontinuing. Hey, we're not following the scope and sequence. Hey, dyslexia is real. It's not fake news. So I was happy about that. Now, you start seeing researchers' names. Of course, that's kind of comforting, right? Right now, we're like in this desperate time that we want to see research and evidence. But at the same token, I'm not a researcher. I'm trying to interpret research as carefully as I can. I feel blessed to have somebody like Devin on the show and all the other, like Marian Rice and Kay and Casey and all these other people that I'm meeting. But at the end of the day, I'm still a skeptic, right? We've been sold a story in the balanced literacy days and we got a lot of things wrong. So I'm reading this and I definitely still had questions. Is this legit? what do I do? Am I doing something wrong? Am I going overboard with decodables? Am I supposed to, it's like, it's hard because we're sending teachers like a really confusing message right now, right? We're telling teachers to rearrange their libraries. Like in my school right now, I said, I don't really want to see level A, B, C, D. I don't want level baskets. I just don't want them right now. Because, what is a level? It doesn't really tell you a lot about a kid. I said, let's have early readers, reading for pleasure books, genre books, but, it's kind of confusing. And then when I read this article, I walked away with questions. And then the whole concept of the pairing, I'm not seeing a lot of those pairs in this sense. I haven't seen a lot of like paired a decodable text and a level text, or I don't know. I think it could dirty.
That's good.
Right.
I don't think that that's what the research is really
Right.
pointing
So
out.
what was the point? What is the point, Faith?
I think again, from reading this,
what was the author's purpose?
Was for teachers to use decodables and leveled books. I think the author wanted to say, hey, there's a place for decodables. Like you said, you're happy that Reading Recovery now is acknowledging that decodables has a place, even though I'm not sure if they are, because they were very careful to put this is sponsored content. So
yeah, and do they have scope and sequences now?
So what they are just putting out here is an article, but I don't know if they necessarily are buying into this or not. That's not even the point. The point is that the author was trying to say that it's beneficial to use both. But in saying it's beneficial to use both doesn't mean that we should sit and pair a decodable with a leveled book. That's why, I wanted Devin to clarify this, because if the teacher is reading this, they might say, oh,
Faith,
maybe
can I interrupt you?
Maybe.
I need to interrupt you.
Yes, why?
I can't control myself. So are you kind of calling BS on something?
I don't.
You want me to press it? Can I press it?
Here's what I want to do. I want to call BS on the idea, not the person, but I want to call BS on the idea that teachers need to start rearranging all their books to match decodables and leveled books. That I'm going to call BS on. Am I right, Devin? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a practical aspect to it too. Like, who has time for that, right? I mean, it's like, and the reality is, if you're going to use decodable text, they are not usually written in a way that, it's going to be easy to match them up, right? I mean, and if you're not going to skip in the scope and sequence, then it's going to be really hard to find a level text on every single, topic of every decodable, right? So one thing I want to point out two things, or say two things. One is that, you talked about, levels A, B, C, D. My feeling about one reason people hate the level text system is because of A, B, and C. It's because of the pattern books. That's where the problem starts, right? So, after that, when there's practice at a kid's level, I mean, whatever levels mean, right? I mean, we all know that the, benchmark assessment system is not a reliable and valid measure. I mean, you all know, reading achievement. And so it's hard to know what a kid's level is, but giving kids books that are increasing in difficulty isn't a bad thing. I think it's just the pattern books and the fact that I think that's it. I think that's the reason people think these are so bad, is you look at A, B, and C, the very first ones, and they're awful. And I tell people, if you're going to use level text, just don't use A, B, and C, because after that, it's just more practice with a lot of things. As long as you're doing your phonics in a systematic way, then giving kids exposure to other books, I think we all agree, is a great opportunity. And you mentioned read alouds, which I also think is really important. You also mentioned independent reading. The data on independent reading are weak, right? So, in the National Reading Panel evaluated the different, the 5 pillars or whatever. The 6th pillar, so to speak, was about independent reading. There was like a fight, okay, I don't know, in the National Reading Panel about whether or not they would include independent reading, right? Basically, some people were like, it has to be included. Other people were like, I'm not doing it. There was some letter that was written. It was a big thing. But the data are not strong, suggesting that kids should be doing independent reading at school. That doesn't mean kids should not be reading. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be reading at the same time, quietly, right? There's nothing that says that's a bad idea. But there's also nothing that says that deer time or whatever people are calling it, conference time. No data suggesting that that's effective. And I think that's the other problem, right, is that people are focusing on these, level of texts or whatever, and they're having kids read them during this independent reading time. And that is not necessarily a good use of kids' time.
So, here's my thought, Devin, just to kind of recap so far what you just said, so that we're all on the same page. You're saying that independent reading time during the school day does not have strong research backing that. What you're saying is that levels A, B, and C, the pattern predictable books, gives all level books a bad name, but not all level books are a bad thing. Is that correct so far? Okay, so here's the thought, though. In saying that, we want to be clear that putting kids into leveled books for group work is not desirable. Is that true?
Depends what the purpose of the group work is. But typically in first grade or kindergarten, the kinds of activities teachers give kids during independent work time or centers or whatever is focused on word, level, activity, focus on word level learning. And so if that's your focus, then that's not what level texts are for, right? That's why we have kids read words in isolation for a reason. It's not that we want kids just to read words, but one of the other things that we found in that study that's really interesting is, so the combination of level text and decodable text and level text together was the most powerful, effect. But what was interesting is that in terms of outcomes, 3 things had the same effect. Reading decodable books alone, reading trade books alone, and just reading words. So which is really interesting, right? So if you just you don't get as big a benefit from doing one or just one of them, but the benefit for reading words is just as good as the benefit for doing any of those other things, right? So I think that if you're going to do center activities that are focused on meaning, maybe there's something you do there, but I think it's tricky to design a really good small independent activity that involves a lot of meaning, maybe drawing a picture and stuff like that. That's just fine. But I would, if I were going to do it, I might design it so that the book that I read whole class, right, would be something that we could do something, meaningful with. So if it's sort of if we're gonna have, kindergartners draw a picture or something, then they could draw a picture related to the shared reading text or whatever. You could give them a couple of keywords and they could, write a sentence that uses keywords from the shared reading book. So there are certainly meaning-based things you could do, but I wouldn't design it based on kids' levels necessarily. The big problem with the levels is the leveling system isn't strong, right? The way that they're leveled, they use a formula, and the way the formula works doesn't always work, right? And that's a problem. And then again, because the benchmark assessment system isn't strong, you don't actually know what level the kids are, right? And you all know this too. I always talk to you about there's usually in benchmark assessment system, the Fountain Pen L1, there are 2 passages for each level. There's E1 and E2, right? if you want kids to get to the next level, give them the E1 that you all the kids pass, right? And I don't say that in a mean way, but like, they're usually 2, and people pick the one that they think the kids can pass. They're not the same level of difficulty. So, that's a problem with level text as well, is that the leveling system itself is not strong, right? And the way that we're measuring kids' performance is also not strong.
So many things are coming to my mind right now. Can I chime in?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So in terms of the pattern books, I'm with you. Those were ridiculous. I just did a presentation this summer on them. I like mom, I like dad. You're not reading. You're just going off of an assumption of what the pattern is or what the picture is saying. I'm with you on that one 101%. In terms of running records, they were a disaster. I was really good at them because I did get intense training and I made sure I got to the hard level. Most people didn't. Many people were under instructing kids. Many people weren't scoring them the right way. I have totally shifted to using universal screeners. You get the information faster. It's evidence-based. It's just so much more efficient. You can't beat an ORF. You just can't. An oral reading fluency assessment. In 1 minute, you get information, and it's so much more accurate, especially if you're doing it digitally, which I do at my job site. There was one thing, though, that I was thinking about that I don't know if I agree or disagree. So, like you said, I definitely don't love those A, Bs, and Cs. And I still have my leveled library. It's in my garage. I took it home. When Read and Recovery ended, I was traumatized. I loved a lot of the stories. They were great. Those problems, those solutions. There were stories about bears and going places and Mama Bear and Papa Bear. Those stories were captivating, and I was deeply attached to many of them, and I didn't throw them out because I believe in repurposing and being intentional with how we use books. But my only concern is so when the article mentions that you can, play with both. So say you haven't taught, and I know Faith, you and I go back and forth about syllable types, but say you haven't taught, V-E or, silent E types, and now you're exposing them to books that have more complex, syllable types or word patterns or things you need to do with vowels. Can't that contribute to kids potentially guessing because they haven't learned certain decoding skills? Some kids won't, and they'll still slide through the word at point of difficulty and tackle it with what they've learned. But if they haven't learned it, is it a danger to present them with something they haven't learned yet in their scope and sequence? I know for some kids it's not a danger, they'll do just fine. But for some kids, isn't that confusing to now show them something that they haven't learned according to their scope and sequence? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Devin.
I think that's an amazing question because, so I often think about this too. I think the last thing you said is the key, which is it really depends on the student and the student's capability, right? So there's some interesting work. I don't know if you've seen this stuff on set for variability. So this is really, okay, so just to briefly explain. So the idea with set for variability is that when we almost always get the wrong answer when we sound something out, right? If you're going to sound out about, a kid might say about or a about, the first thing they're going to say is probably not about, right? And so what the brain does, researchers think, is to manipulate the wrong thing to make it the right thing, right? So you say about, and your brain sort of does these mental gymnastics of what do I know that's similar to that? And your brain sort of searches for the nearest neighbor, the most similar word that there is to that. And so it basically will come up with the one that is the most similar. The best example of this I think about is the word fan, right? So if you sound out fan, that's fan, right? It's not fan, which is the real word. So like what kids do, what is they manipulate those things. So they basically like adjust it so that they can get the right thing from the wrong thing. Because, and we do this all the time, right? So like my favorite example is with the letter T, right? So the sound at the end of the word bat isn't a T sound, right? It's not a full T sound, right? It's not bat, it's bat. Put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, stays there, right? But we do that manipulation. Kid sounds out, b-at, and then they think bat, and then they turn it into the right thing. That's what set for variability does, is it allows you to turn the wrong thing into the right thing. The trick of it is, for instruction, if you give that to kids who maybe are struggling, it's possible that's too difficult for them. I don't know what the research does not say at what point, but I think that's what I do worry about sometimes, except for variability. We've done research with this, basically trying to get kids to do this with just even auditory words, but it's tricky because you don't want to take away, you don't want to give kids something they're not ready for. And sometimes I worry they're not quite ready for that.
So I think I've had the same experience that Judy is talking about, where if they were given something that was not controlled and they were not ready, they will start guessing. And so there is that fine line where you have to really know the kids and know, are they ready to be exposed to something? Now, they could be exposed to something during a read aloud, or if they're just kind of doing their own thing with books, but to teach from a book, that's a different story, and you have to be really careful about that. So our listeners are probably wondering, so what's the right answer? But what I'm hearing you say, Devin, is you have to just know the kids and know what they can handle. And if you start to see them do things that maybe are undesirable in terms of what strategies they're using, hold back a little bit and stay longer with something that matches what you're teaching.
That's very interesting.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think so. You know, people ask me all the time, like, should we teach kids nonsense words? The data on that are not clear. But what I will say is that I use them when I have kids I call inveterate guessers. They just won't stop, right? So it's like, now there's no choice, right? This word doesn't mean anything, so you have to sound it out. But I think if kids get past that point where they're using decoding first, then things change, right? And I'm sure you've seen this too, like in some of the work I've done and some of my teaching, when you start teaching kids like a systematic phonics program, right, they start to do worse, okay, because they are trying to sound everything out. So they're really slow, right, and deliberate. And then you see this thing that now they start getting you use their coding skills, they all these words in their brain, and they use, you know, as you all know, there's like with the high frequency words, it's at and in addition to the whole word and, right? So you have these multiple ways of accessing the word, and then their fluency shoots right up, right? After they get that early exposure. And so on the nonsense word fluency, they'll do really badly for a second because they're just trying to figure it out. They're getting really slow at it, but then it results in really fast progress.
So
I just wanted to, Faith, one more thing on that thing. I don't want to lose focus. Devin, you said something very interesting before. You were talking about sounding things out and how kids will correct themselves. Aren't a lot of those kids correcting based on meaning?
Okay, this is a very good question. The answer is partly yes. So there are two ways in which we do it. One way is like there's a term for this, Phona Tactics. I'm sorry I even said it, but that's just a technical term. What it means is there are certain things we can't say that you can say like in other languages, right? You know, some languages put an S sound and a Z sound together, you know, like, you know, sort of these sort of unusual languages where they have like 9 consonants in a row, right? We can't do that. Our mouth won't accommodate those kind of gymnastics. So we have this thing where our brains basically won't allow us to make these weird patterns of sounds. So that's one thing. We're gonna have to change it so that it like actually makes sense, because fan is hard to say. So our brains are going to adjust it just because it sounds weird. But the second thing is, yes, kids are going to make adjustments based on like meaning. And then we get dangerously close to like whole language, right? So it's like, wait, what are we doing there? So what I always say about that is, like, the first thing is, I'm curious what you all think, but you both think, the first thing is they have to sound it out because the letters are the access code, right? The letters, I always say, the letters have the answers, right? And so, you know, I have this, like, this quick story. So I remember I was doing a lesson in a 5th grade class with kids with dyslexia, and kids had read the words off the board, and then they were practicing, right? One of the kids volunteered to read the words. He got the word circus, and he couldn't figure it out. And he looked at the ceiling. And I, at that moment, I thought, what is he doing? And then I realized, I was like, he doesn't trust the letters, right? Somewhere along the line, someone told him the language doesn't make sense. So you might as well look at the ceiling because the letters aren't going to give you the answers, right? So the kids have to sound it out first. They have to decode it first. But it's absolutely right. We're going to use meaning as a confirmation strategy, right? And that's where it gets like really tricky, because people who don't understand at the level we all do start to misunderstand that what we're saying is use meaning for reading words. That's not what we mean. But anyway, at least that's not what I mean. I don't know, does that resonate with the two of you?
Definitely. I mean, I could speak for myself. I'm sure Judy feels the same way.
Yeah, come on, Faith. You haven't given Devin one cheers tonight.
I did so at the very beginning.
Can we give him another one?
Of course.
Sorry, Devin. I'm messing with. Love it.
So, Devin, yes, absolutely. What you're saying makes complete sense. So I'm glad you're clarifying this, because I think there are a lot of teachers out there that could read articles such as this one that might be at the beginning of their journey, and they're trying to take this in. And, you know, it's not like anybody's to blame. It's like I mentioned, the game of telephone. How many different ways can you interpret something? And I do think when you mention, yeah, we use meaning as, you know, but that's something that comes after you look at the words and you sound out. So if the word is record or record, you're going to know which one it is based on the meaning of the sentence. So you still had to decode that word, but the way you read that word will be different based on the sentence. So that definitely makes sense to me. So Devin, here's my question. In the article, in the Reading Recovery article, How to Pair Decodable Texts with Leveled Books, it specifically says here that leveled books can help bridge these gaps, meaning in language, by offering rich narratives and vocabulary to enhance students' language exposure. Now, I would not look to leveled books as a way to really increase vocabulary, and I wouldn't consider that to really be rich language. I would use other types of books. Can you clarify for everybody what that means? Because if I'm reading this, it sounds to me that leveled books would be a good way to kind of balance the rope, right? If you're looking at the language comprehension, oh, we'll use leveled books. That's going to offer all of those pieces, but not necessarily. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. It depends like what's in the leveled book set, right? I mean, some of them, you know, I mean, some of the leveled books are just trade books, aren't they? I mean, they're just like, you know, Elephant and Piggy are like in there, right? I mean, they're like, you know, they're, I mean, so it's not just like, you know, contrived texts, you know, written by, you know, like, you know, Thomas Pinnell people, right? The guy reading people. So I think that like, so it depends like what's in those leveled texts. I think that if the texts are just leveled because, trying to give kids like texts that are more and less difficult, that's great. But that's why Lexiles exist. Like, that's the point of a Lexile, is that it gives you sort of, and those Lexiles are like really like heavily researched. People who like design Lexiles like spend a lot of time on that. So like, you can trust Lexiles, to be honest, better than you can trust the ABCD, right? So I think like, pick whatever book, right? If it's at the kids like level, if it seems like this is a book they can handle. And like, what handle means is like a question, like I think we just have to answer, as we said, based on our experience, working with individual kids. But, we want to give the kids books that they can handle. And if there are, books in the level of text set that are like good books, like great, let's give them those books. But a lot of times they're not good. I mean, that's kind of your point, I think, Faith. Is that what you're saying? Like, basically, like a lot of the books in those text sets are like pretty not great.
Yeah, that is my point. And if my goal is to really try to give kids rich language and experiences with lots of varied stories, and I don't know if I'm going to start pulling out a level G for that. I'm going to try.
Knowing you, Faith, you're not pulling out the level G as your first go-to. I know you.
No, I'm
for
not.
a couple of years, you're definitely not.
No, I'm not doing that. So I guess the good news is that more educators are embracing decodables, right? The bad news is they might be trying to look at them through a balanced literacy lens. That's how I read this article, that as decodables are getting to be more as something that's a part of the classroom, and that it's important for those beginner readers, people don't necessarily know what to make of it in terms of how to use them correctly. So I guess, Devin, if you were to leave our listeners with a bit of advice, what would it look like? And I know that I'm asking something that maybe you can't pinpoint with exact certainty, but I want to leave people with something, a tip, something that they walk away, a takeaway from this whole session, that they could say, now I know at least what track I should be on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that first, kids need lots of opportunities to practice what they've been learning, which means that they need access to controlled and decodable texts. And I would also say that kids, for the sake of language comprehension, need exposure to a wide range of interesting texts that address important themes and topics that kids should learn about in different grades. And that the way that kids should be accessing those is not through independent reading. It's not necessarily going to be even in like your small group setting, although it could be. That's something like when you do sort of shared reading or whatever, you call that, whatever term you use for that, that's the time that you should be focusing on that. So use opportunities to do reading together to focus on the meaning, and maybe extend in some center activities, but spend a lot of time in your decoding lessons or in your word work kind of lessons, focus on using decodable and controlled text to get practice with the patterns that they've been seeing.
Judy, any last questions or thoughts?
Devin, I want to change it up a little bit. What's your favorite podcast? Do you listen to any podcasts besides the Literacy View? And don't tell us a literacy.
That's podcast. A loaded question, Devin.
Well, Faith got me into Mel Robbins, so I'm like really into Mel Robbins. So like when I'm commuting now, I'm listening to Mel's tips of the day. So it's changed my life. So I'm just curious, what are you listening to?
Yeah. So I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I gotta say, I work a lot. So like so I listen to music in the background when I'm working, but like a lot of times, it's that more than anything. So So yeah, like I never, I wasn't a couple literacy ones. I have a, favorite, but I think I just,
Of course, it must be the literacy view.
yeah, I mean, that's the one that I've listened to as, I listen to Soul to Story, of course, too, right?
Of course.
But, but I haven't
All right, I'm sorry I put you on the spot.
No, that's
You
okay.
did say you like to listen to music, so what radio station, what song, what band? We know that. We know that Tim Shanahan is a Swiftie. We learned that on the
Is that right?
Yeah. So what are you listening to?
Oh man, you guys, these are hard questions. I don't know. I have a random list of songs I like. So it's a lot of stuff from the 90s, like, because I grew up in the 90s. So, I really love Alanis Morissette's Ironic because most of the things aren't ironic. And so I always find it entertaining. But she's a really great, singer and songwriter. And
I love that song too.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's my favorite artist is Annie Lennox. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I learned something new about you. So, you're just a regular person just like us, right? Researchers listen to music, they bike ride, they have fun.
Yeah.
And you were so fun to talk to. You were like speaking my love language all night tonight. This topic is so important. And I think that, you've really added some perspective. And I think this will be really helpful to people in the field, just like me and just like Faith, that are trying to sort this out. It's muddy right now. And we want to get it right. We want to get it right.
And I just want to say one thing. I also want to leave people with the idea that, people like Devin this is their living. This is what they do. And, getting it from a researcher saying it rather than interpretation. That's why I kept trying to go back and making sure that I'm clarifying it in teacher talk, because I just want to make sure that people walk away with the right message. And like I said, the author of this article, not picking on her at all, I thought she did a really good thing in terms of trying to say we should be reading lots of different kinds of books. That's the positive. But I do think it's important for people out there to realize, just because researchers are quoted, if somebody is writing a blog, writing an article, they can interpret research in many different ways. So we have to be smart enough to question and think and try to get to the bottom of this, just because we see a bunch of quotes. And it's the same thing when you read a book. There could be a long bibliography, right, of lots and lots of people with lots of important works, but then the book slants it in a different direction. So I want to just leave people with that thought.
Can I ask something else? So first of all, I love that point. I always like to say people like to use references as a weapon. It's like, well, don't challenge me because I have 47 references. That doesn't make it better. But importantly, so this is, research practice. What do you want to tell me? What should I be thinking about as, in the work that I do, which, covers a wide range of topics, especially, kids with reading difficulty and dyslexia. But I want to hear from you all, like, what is on your minds? What's on the minds of your listeners that we need to be paying attention to? You don't see as much, that kind of thing. I'll take anything, because I love to figure out how to make the work relevant.
So Devin, I wasn't even going to ask you, but Judy and I have an ongoing battle about syllable types. So I need you to please tell Judy about syllable types now. We have to end the show with that. Sorry.
Flexibility too. Oh no, she's getting me started. It's 9:00 night. We're recording. I was in a good mood after this long day, and you had to go there, didn't you?
I'm just going to say one thing. There are lots of programs that have evidence of improving student achievement, particularly for kids with reading difficulty. There are programs that involve syllable types that have positive evidence. There are programs that involve no syllable types that have positive evidence. So the evidence suggests that helping kids understand how to read long words is important. And the way that you do that, I think we should think more about that as a field, but I don't want to, like, I want Judy to have a good night. And and so I just like, you know, I mean, I listen a lot. So this is a big thing for me too. Like I know people, like I say things about syllables and people are not happy about it. So, but I think that first thing I just said is important. And second thing is like, that's why I want to talk to you all. I want to hear from the community about like what's on people's minds. So when I say like, I wonder about syllable types and stuff, or more syllable division than syllable types, like, you know, I want to know what you all are saying. I want to hear back, right? Like I care about practice to research. Do you know what I mean? Like that's important.
That's why we have you on.
Faith, I love what Devin just said. You know why? He's not a critic from the couch, which Wiley Blevins came up with that slogan. You're not a critic on the couch. You want to help us teachers, and that's all we want from the researchers. We are desperate for that. And most researchers are trying to really, you know, bridge that gap and really help with the application and what that means in the classroom, but some are not. And some are just putting out these research articles and we're left with riddles and questions, and you caring and saying you want to hear from the teachers. Faith, how are we going to make that happen? That we're going to have Devin hear some of the questions from our listeners. We got to have Devin back.
So you know what, Devin, we will have you back and maybe we'll have a no BS summit with you. We'll have some questions from people so that you could continue this. It was such a delight having you on. And this was a really important conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Judy,
amazing. I'm going to wrap up quickly.
Yes.
Okay, you could follow us on our website, theliteracyview.com. You could now advertise with the Literacy View. All the directions on how to do that are on our website. Contact us. You can also donate to the Literacy View. We don't make a dollar off of this show, so we're doing it from the kindness of our heart, and it costs money to do it. So you can donate to the Literacy View. You can also join our Facebook group. We're growing by the minute. The Literacy View, real teachers letting loose. Share our episodes with your friends. Tell your friends to join us and follow us. You know where to find Faith on Twitter. You know where to find Judy, and also follow us on Instagram, The Literacy View. Thank you, everyone. Changing lives, one view at a time.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers. Amen.